talking, well.
You have it here, but I'm just saying, do you think we need to address that tonight? Is that important?
The only, if we are focused on, what I'm going to call industrial scale gas well, if we're focused on that, then from my perspective, the only thing, you may want to deal with what you got as mining, but as far as what we're looking at, just from what I understand, the mandate, not the mandate, but the focus is tonight, we do need to talk about mining, but only insofar as I've done here, which is to say that whatever else is going on with mining, it does not include drilling.
We're not wishing to impact
Right.
anything related to what you call mineral mining.
Right.
Right,
Right.
and we'll go through it line by line, but my intention in drafting this was that, and there's one thing we need to talk about in the zoning code, which is related to this question when we get there, but as far as I'm concerned, subject to this one question that we're going to have later, this doesn't touch mining, existing mining, except to say whatever's going on with mining, gas drilling is not included in the definition of mining. So that's what I think we did, so I think we need to talk about mining to that extent, but not talk about mining as mining.
Right.
Does that make sense?
And I guess we should ask whether everybody agrees that we should just have a narrow focus here.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I guess I had a couple questions. Now, can you do it where it's high impact gas drilling? Is it hydrofracking or is it gas drilling? So does a vertical well that's not hydrofracked fall under this?
As drafted, every gas well falls under this. But we grandfather, what grandfathered means, whether we're talking about gas drilling or anything else, anytime you do anything, whether a town has zoning or doesn't have zoning, anytime you do a land use law that essentially would prohibit a particular use, what the law says is that, subject to what I'm going to say next, if you ban that law or prohibit that law or prohibit that use, or ban that use, assuming it was legal to begin with, is what's called grandfather. Which is the example I can give you is I own a hotel, and you decide for some reason that I can't conceive of that from now on we don't want hotels in this town. My hotel, assuming that it's legal, assuming that I pulled a building permit, assuming that, the state building and fire code is complied with, and I didn't do the gas myself and the electric myself, because I don't know how, and that would be a damage, not just a danger, not just to myself, but to the neighbors. But assuming that it's legal, and assuming that there's a CO and everything else to that, that use, even though yesterday we passed a law that says no more hotels, continues to be a lawful use, albeit a lawful non-conforming use. That's how, in this draft, that's how gas wells are treated, as long as they're legal. There cannot be, and I'm not here to editorialize, so I apologize if it sounds like I am, but I don't know how else to say this. So when people say that we've been fracking for 40 years or 60 years or whatever, maybe, but if they've used more than, depending on who you talk to, either 60,000 gallons of water to do it, or 80,000, or 100,000, depending on the interpretation, it's not what we're talking about here. So however they've done it, if they've got all the permits, whether it's a vertical well, horizontal well, bless them, it's fine. But they can't, by definition, there is no such thing as a legal frack well in the state if we define fracking to mean the fracking we're talking about, which is a high volume of anything that goes over 100,000 gallons is not legal in the state. So, no matter what anybody says. That's why we got the S-guys. You wouldn't need that S-guys if this was really the same as your grandfather's well. But your grandfather's well is not grandfather here. The other question you raised is it okay to call it hydrofracking? Different lawyers will give you different opinions on this. And if we inherited a law that did say hydrofracking, I would have no hesitancy defending it. because if we inherited that law, because the essence of land use planning is impact-based. And as between conventional drilling and everything else, the impacts are different with respect to hydrofracking. However, because what Albany has left us under that gas mining statute, DCL 230303 subsection 2, says we're not supposed to touch anything that has to do with operations and processes, because hydrofracking is a type of drilling, it is a process. The safer thing, we think, is to, as much as everybody would like to say, let's just deal with hydrofracking, we think the safer thing, just because of that little preemption thing out there, is to stay away from hydrofracking, except to say including hydrofracking when we talk about gas drilling, but to not single out hydrofracking, even though those are the impacts. Any other land use, that's what we would do. Like Albany has not left us that option. So we
So
think,
what are you suggesting?
so we're suggesting that you, whatever you do with this, the zoning amendment, that the subject matter should be gas drilling, and which protects you on the hydrofracking side, and to the extent that there's an issue with respect to conventional wells, that wouldn't be an issue. Recognize how we got here, which is, the state put us there. There's grandfathering, so you're not hurting anybody who's legal right now by definition. And by the way, that would apply even if you didn't have grandfathering in here. And then furthermore, don't forget that there is a use variance, what's essentially a use variance provision in this. And so to the extent that somebody who's got a so-called conventional well wants to do it, there is a mechanism, a relief mechanism for it. So our recommendation, which this happens to reflect, not coincidentally, is that you paint with what you're painting with the picture you're painting is gas drilling, and you grandfather what's already existing and lawful. That can't be fracked wells, despite what people say, because they're not legal. But if something's legal, and then to the extent that there's something there, somebody wants to come in with a new thing that's not going to cause problems, whether it's so-called conventional, they've got the ability to go through that variance mechanism. And we're very comfortable that protects you and protects anybody who wants to bring that kind of variance procedure. It gives them the benefit of what the law says.
So basically, this would be more of the committee to ban gas drilling.
Yes.
Okay, rather than to ban heavy industry or high impact use or hydrofracking, it's basically the committee to ban gas drilling. Okay.
And by the way, I concur with that, because even conventional well drilling uses the same chemicals to lubricate the drill as it goes straight down. So the chemicals that are used in hydrofracking are also used in the drilling process of conventional wells. So it's wise to ban simply gas drilling.
Right, and Vince, where Vince is going with this, which we all know, or many of us know, is if you look at where the problems have come, if you talk to somebody who will acknowledge problems, I understand there's a dispute as to whether there's ever been a problem with gas drilling, but with respect to the people who acknowledge that there have been problems, those problems exist without regard to whether it's a horizontal or whether it's a vertical. In fact, in Dimmock, the problem was vertical. The big part where you can have people worry about the communication, the fracture communication, things like that. But the first and biggest part where you can have a problem with aquifers is as you're going down through them and with the whole casing and the cement. And as Vince points out, those are exactly the same issues, whether you've got a so-called conventional well or an unconventional well.
Okay, so
No,
it's okay.
like,
On this committee, is everybody in agreement that this is the direction that we're going? Is everybody in agreement that this is the name of the committee and that what we're really going to look at this amendment is based around the issue of gas drilling rather than a ban on heavy industry?
Yes.
I would call it, I'm not really sure where we're going with the name of the committee, but we should call it industrial scale gas drilling, and what we call this committee doesn't have anything to do with what the law looks like, but that's what we're doing, what we're talking about. That's really our focus, I think.
And Ray, basically, industrial scale gas drilling, you would define as anything over 100,000 gallons.
Right, and the build out that comes with it and all that other stuff.
Okay.
But
And that is defined in the draft, correct?
not the term industrial scale. Because again, we just go with gas drilling. But what I'm saying for the name of the committee,
Right.
because of where we were left, because of where Albany left us, yep, that's what we want to do, but what we can do, or what we think, what we're advising we can do. And then leave the relief valve on the variance.
Okay.
Okay?
Everybody's in agreement with that? Okay. All right.
And that, I would just point out, that's consistent with what we heard last week from a lot of the people who commented. What I heard repeatedly was, I don't have a problem with you addressing, however we define addressing gas drilling. I have a problem with you doing something with respect to other industries. And we heard that over and over and over again, right, from the public.
But, and just clarifying, in the amendment, we're just calling it gas drilling. For this committee, we're talking industrial scale gas drilling.
Right. And literally what we're calling it is natural gas and petroleum, either extraction activities, excavation activities, or support activities. Those are the defined terms. But when you work through those are gas drilling issues.
Okay. All right, so we begin on, if we're looking at Article 6, right?
Well,
Well,
Are we gonna look at mining and excavation?
you almost need, well,
you need definition.
yeah, and you almost need to do your line on everything in here, whether it at first blush speaks to gas drilling, is in here because gas drilling is impacted.
Right.
So, we can do it any way you want, but.
However you would like to.
Okay, if people are, and they may not be, this may not be the time for people to do this, but if they are in a position to do it, the one way to do this would be go through line by line, make sure, A, people understand what it is, and then B, if they do, if they don't, explain it, and if they do, make sure that this committee at least, which isn't the final word, obviously the town board is the final word, but for purposes of this committee, that you know what every line is, so that in turn, whatever iteration or form of this gets recommended after the town board, this committee is blessed. So I'm not sure how you can do that unless you go through line by line.
Absolutely, so let's do that.
Okay. Do you want me to lead it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it'll work better. I mean, if you guys want me to read it, but I think your voice carries better than mine.
Okay. So the first thing we've got on page 1, Article 1, which is the so-called, are we looking at the same thing?
We're looking at,
Okay, yep, I couldn't tell.
not the appendix, but the actual
Correct,
draft.
although we should have the appendix handy.
Which is right here.
So the first thing, what the appendix is all about, it does 3 things. It sets forth the legal authority for the town to pass something like this. And there's really nothing to read, for one of us, 2 of us, I mean, but one besides me. But the section 1 authority issue is just lawyer stuff. It's either right or it's wrong. And I have no doubt if it's wrong, I'm told. You got a lawyer at this table. But I think that's pretty good. Then, the next thing in the appendix, and also section 2 on page 1, is the findings of fact. Remember that any law has nothing to do with gas drilling. Any law, the standard that this committee, well, the town board, when they pass any law, has to satisfy is to not be arbitrary and capricious. And the way that you, which is a low standard, and the way that you demonstrate that you're not arbitrary or capricious is you tie together the concerns you have with what you're trying to correct. So the concerns you have are the things that we articulate in the findings of fact. So what we want to do, and whether we do it tonight or not, But then this, so reference to section 1.2 of the law itself flips us over to section 2 of the appendix, which is where the findings of fact are. Now, paragraph number 1 may be augmented, it doesn't need to be, it could be, but the guts of this, the gist of this are, I don't know if people have had a chance to read them, what are the things from 2 to, and so if there's anything here that doesn't belong here, maybe there's a reference, I'm just getting hypothetical, if there's a reference to tourism, and we don't have tourism in the town, so forth, we would want to change that. If there are things that are special, beyond, above and beyond that we haven't picked up, we could put those in there. But we have these here to support any kind of challenge that we were acting in an arbitrary and capricious manner. We don't have to put these in this law here. Other lawyers would typically, everybody agrees you need something like this. Other lawyers would say don't clog up the law and put it in here. Instead, put it in your resolution. Where we have a town board hereby find boom, 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 and then accordingly we hereby enact this. You could do it that way. We like to do it this way because we like to think of every single place where somebody could attack something. And one of the things you're going to attack if you're on the other side of this is to try to say that we were arbitrary and capricious with it. So what we try to do is we put them in our law so that if somebody wants to go pick on a town, they go pick on a town that wasn't one of ours on this issue. But, to the extent that by the time, either this committee or the town board, by the time something gets enacted, if it does, a town lawyer, and the town lawyer says, I don't want to put it in there, she says she wants to put it in the resolution, that's okay. That's a matter of style. But the reason to us it's beyond style because we want to have it in so everybody sees it up front. And hopefully they move on and go pick on somebody else.
I agree. I would urge that we get to the guts of the ban as opposed to this. I think this is much easier for us to go through
Okay.
perhaps even at another meeting.
Yes, okay.
We may want to add to the first paragraph,
Yeah.
or something, but otherwise.
But I think that's more a question of
Right.
style and facts as opposed to legalese.
But I like the idea of it being in here rather than it being part of the resolution, I agree with that. All right, so these are the appendix, so we want to move on to line by line of the amendment?
How do you want
I'd say we just go
to?
through
Okay.
line by line. You go ahead and read it, and if we have questions, we're going to ask them.
All right, so we got into a little, one of the things we changed was the definition of farm use. And we got into a little bit last week about CAFOs and the like. And the point here, we never go through, it may well be that if we subsequently do a law that is high impact uses, that you ban CAFOs or any number of other high impact uses. Nothing in this present draft does that. The only thing you do with the definitions of high density industrial fowl production, cattle, swine production, and so forth, is use it in our definition of farm use. Because when we're saying farm use, we're defining farm use to make it so it really looks like most other people's definition. We do want to say, hey, our definition of farm use does not include these other things. And we don't have to do that here. We could take that out if it's going to cause an issue. But nowhere do we say thou cannot have CAFOs. All we're saying is that in our definition of farm use, there's a lot of places we say we can have farm use. We're just saying farm use does not include CAFOs. But we could fight that issue some other day.
So let me ask you then, does a confinement dairy, like the Yankees confinement dairy operation of 450 to 500 some odd animals, fall under the definition here of a CAFO?
I don't know what they do. What a real CAFO is, according to the Department of Agriculture, is not a farm. If theirs is a real farm, then it's likely not. If you really have pasture, their definition, that's where that came from, about vegetative growth and all that stuff. Crops, vegetative forage, or post-harvest residues are not sustaining. That's agricultural department stuff. And what it really means is whether you have 500 cows or 2,000 cows, if you pasture them, and you've got the acreage, that's not a CAFO, no matter how big you are. A CAFO, the way the world defines those, is almost without regard to number, because you can have different types and sizes of animals. But it's what you do. They're basically, CAFO is concentrated area animal feeding operation. So it's really a place where it's not a real farm where they go out and eat grass. It's a place where you concentrate them, usually on cement or something else, or dirt where there's no growth, and just fatten them up. But I can't answer that question without knowing, having visited the place.
I'm just wondering if we want to get into that now. And secondly, I looked at Cherry Valley. What they did, instead of calling it farm use, they call it agricultural use. And
we do that too.
Okay, well, I'm just asking, if we look at that, and I think we all have a copy, it's on page 7 of the Cherry Valley. And then look at what we call farm use in the draft. I would just ask all of us, if we would, to look at both and see which of the two, if either, more describes what we want to go on and over. And for those, may I just read it I know some of the people in the audience may have the draft, which was online, but for the Cherry Valley reads, is that all right if I read it out loud, Chris? Agricultural use. The use of a parcel of land for agricultural purposes, including tilling the soil, dairying, pasture, apiculture, arboriculture, horticulture, floriculture, aquatic farming, harvesting of tree products, and animal husbandry. Also included are the necessary accessory uses and structures for packing, treating, and storing of products, produce, and equipment, provided that the operation of any such accessory use shall be secondary to that of the normal agricultural activities. Agricultural use includes on-site processing of meat from animals grown on site, but does not include slaughterhouses or meat processing from animals farmed off-site or kennels.
Let me explain one thing that I want to at least point out to people as we go along is ambiguities. Ambiguities are not good in anything that we're doing legally. The issue with so I think, first of all, I want to say that if we're going, we can strip out this CAFO stuff. I probably should for the purpose of this. But the comparison then would be the first sentence, and again, we have a separate definition of agriculture. But the farm use thing to compare would be the one sentence, otherwise the one sentence that we did, which is use of land and on-farm buildings, structures, and equipment employed in the production of plants, crops, and/or livestock, and livestock products as a commercial enterprise. Let's leave off that second sentence about not including pigs. Comparing that one sentence to the issue of the Cherry Valley, the problem, the ambiguity that I see with Cherry Valley is right in the beginning. We're defining agricultural use, but the essence of the definition is the word agricultural purposes. The use of a parcel of land for agricultural purposes, and then it goes on. But agricultural purposes is never defined. So that's a big hole. So that's how we got to where we are. So what I think most people agree agricultural purposes is what we call the farm use, which is the use of land and on-farm buildings, structures, and equipment employed in the production of plants, crops, livestock products as a commercial enterprise. I don't think, we pick the plants because not all plants are crops. We pick the plants, crops, and livestock products. So I don't know why it would have to be any broader. And the problem, and like I said, I don't want to criticize anybody else's drafting, unless it's, anyway, but I don't know what agricultural purposes is.
Okay.
So
No,
that's,
I brought that up just as something I read, and I wondered if, you know, one would be a little better than the other, and I.
and it might be, I'm not trying to
Yeah,
do that.
yeah.
All right, so let me just read this, because I mean, as a farmer myself, you know, I have real concerns about impacting any of the agricultural community. And as much as I believe in grass-based production, the reality is that confinement dairies provide the infrastructure for the rest of us to farm. And without them, all the rest of us trying to farm are dead in the water, at least around here. I mean, there's no feed mills, there's no slaughterhouses, you know, they just go away without the big dairies that make up that economy. So when I'm reading this, and it says high-density industrial cattle or swine production, facilities used for the feeding or holding for more than 45 days in preparation for sale or slaughter.
Let me interrupt you
I
for a
thought we were
second.
gonna strike all
Yeah, that's-
this. We just
that's-
said we were
sorry?
striking
Yeah,
this whole
that's,
section
and
out.
again, that's not us
Yeah,
Okay,
putting our nose where, that's the USDA.
okay, so we're striking
but
all
we're
this.
striking that
Okay.
whole,
If you strike the second sentence in the farm use,
Yeah,
so the farm use now becomes use of land and non-farm buildings, period, after commercial, so you strike the term farm use does not include.
okay.
and then
you
that whole
don't-
next
yeah,
section.
then you don't need
Let's,
any of that.
because I don't even want to get into this because
You
it's
don't have
it's
to.
a huge issue, so I
Yeah.
don't know. Yeah,
So
we
you
don't
don't
have.
That was not the intent.
Okay, all right, good, that's good.
Okay,
All right, and so all we're doing is getting rid of that final sentence of the term farm use does not include high-density industrial cattle, swine, or
That whole
fowl production.
section.
right.
So it's farm use, the use of land and on-farm building structures and equipment employed in the production of plants, crops, and/or livestock and livestock products as a commercial enterprise.
Right.
Okay, that's fine.
And then all of B is being
G is
stricken.
gone.
Okay.
All right, well, I mean, let's.
No,
let's
no.
make it,
Vince, you cool, are you all right with that?
I'm following it.
Okay, Trish, Barbara? I mean, I have issues with CAFOs, but I don't think that's the issue
That's
for
not
this
what I'm
committee,
doing.
that's the
This
issue
is the
for
time,
a comprehensive plan and
Yeah.
the town's way. All right, so, we want to go to section 2.2C?
Correct.
Okay.
So the next thing, this, this is basically cleaning up, this is basically, I think, making clear what I think the draftsperson of this code really intended. This is on page 6 of the existing code. The existing definition of manufacturing / industrial, which is never used as a term. The only thing that is used is manufacturing industrial district. And that's how they're using this. If you go into the other districts that we have, they reference district. This one just didn't for some reason. But if you look at the existing definition, that's clear that's what they're doing. A specially zoned area. So they're not talking about a use, they're not trying to define a use, they're trying to basically talk about the district that we're talking about.
Right.
And so all we did existing section C is to clean that up, and call it what it is, which is, say, a manufacturing industrial district is land within the town zoned for purposes specified in Article 10. And that's really what that thing should have said, that's not a substantive change, but it's, in my opinion, but it is cleaning up and, again, removing an ambiguity. Any ambiguity is a potential lawsuit.
Okay, so we're gonna change manufacturing industrial definition within the zoning. It says especially zoned area used solely for the purpose of manufacturing goods or industrial uses, because it's not really saying it's a manufacturing industrial district, even though the definition is.
Well, it looks like you read manufacturing industrial and you think that that is going to talk about a use.
A use, but it talks
But
about
it's
an
talking
area.
about a zoned area,
Right, so
which
that's
means
not-
a district. They
Right.
just didn't do it right.
So, and then we do deal with manufacturing industrial use.
In Article 10.
They're right.
It's legit.
Okay, I think that's fine.
I have no problem with that.
Barbara and Vince and Trish?
I just do, yes.
Okay, Barb?
All right, in D, as in David, we're changing the definition of mining. We're trying to do, the intent here was to not affect, in the sense of touching, to not even touch whatever this town allows or doesn't allow with respect to mineral mining. Okay? We know we have to change the definition of mining to do that, because as defined right now, mining includes petroleum products. That too is a slip on the part of whoever drafted this, because in New York State, the mineral mining law which is sand and gravel and topsoil and things like that, is a different statutory mechanism than the gas mining law. So I actually, and this doesn't mean a hill of beans, but I'm going to mention it anyway. I've actually never seen one of any zoning, and I've read hundreds of these things. I've never seen a zoning code before that included, within their definition of mining, gas drilling. What we normally do is it doesn't say anything about the petroleum products. It usually says kind of what yours does or kind of what we put in. But then we go in anyway, because belt and suspenders, that we're so paranoid, and then we go in anyway and say, notwithstanding any provision here up to the contrary, mining shall not include gas mining. You guys did the sort of unusual thing of putting in petroleum mining in this. So we know we want to do that as part of our charge on this committee. And I just put in, we're in here anyway, I just put in what's essentially the state's definition of mining. What you see in D on page 3 that goes over is taken almost verbatim from the mineral mining statute.
So this mineral and excavation, this big long definition, and section 2.2I, 2 and 3, or 1, 2, 3, those are all basically from the New York State definition.
Correct.
Okay.
And with one question I have, not even an exception, and I'll look at this again, both today, if somebody asks, because I guess somebody's going to ask me afterwards, but in any event, the next time we meet, I'll make sure this is, no pun intended, rock solid. But the intention was not to touch whatever you do with gravel mining. The issue that I have, just to skip ahead, that I didn't touch, but that we need to touch at some point, is if you look at in the existing code, at page 15 of the existing code, and specifically section 7.2, the special permit uses. 43 is really, but yeah. So we have, so mineral mining is basically sand and gravel and topsoil in the state statute. And the state lets you, if you want to ban it altogether, you can, mineral mining, you can do that. If you want to let it in, but below a certain threshold, you can do that, and you can regulate it basically within, fairly tightly. But if you let it in, and you let it in above a certain threshold, you can't. There's almost nothing you can do. All right, so that's now my issue here in 7.2 is, and I didn't take this out. But we need to address this before the next draft. Is what do we do with number 3? I believe number 3 should be what's called intentionally omitted, because I can't imagine what that is if it's not mining. The definition, the state statute, our definition, it's sand and gravel, that's what mineral mining is. But given that, this is what I mean about, this is a pretty serious hole, because if you think that you've restricted things, you've got a special permit use, for example, in this district or others, that say as long as it's under 1,000 tons a year. So you think you know what you're doing, you meaning the town. And you think that you got it under control. Does that mean that if it's over 1,000 tons per year, what does that mean? Is that gravel pit? It's clearly a mistake.
And I wouldn't even know unless I guess we talked to the state to find out how much is removed. I don't even know if they measured it.
Well, there's not even, because they have this bifurcated treatment that if you're below a certain amount, if you're above it. But my point is, we already covered that in 4 and other places. What is a gravel pit if it's not part of mining? That's my point.
Right.
So it's like, it'd be like if we had multiple references to different kinds of.
In my mind, a gravel pit would be a place that had mining and excavation of under 1,000 tons.
I don't know what else it can be.
So.
either above or below, but that's what I mean, so.
Yeah, so basically the suggestion then is to remove number 3 of
Right.
section 7.2.
Right, but I want everybody on the committee to know, if somebody comes back to you, whether it's somebody who's in the audience tonight or tomorrow, and somebody comes, or next week, and says, what are you doing? You deleted gravel mine, gravel pits. That's not what we did.
Right.
Gravel, it's just that gravel pits are already picked up in our definition of mining.
Well,
And
there is no definition for gravel pits.
right,
in the
right.
original.
So then what the law says is you go to common usage. And then that flips you back to what we know as mining. So the point is, I just want to make sure you case it, so you guys don't get blindsided. Taking this out does not change what happens about mining in this town.
It just clears up an ambiguity.
Right.
Okay,
So I'll take
And it
that out.
allows the use of gravel pits.
Yeah.
as long as it's under.
Well, whatever was there before, we're not
1,000
touching.
tons per year that was in the zoning before.
Yeah, we're not touching it.
Okay.
If you can do it before, you can do it. If you can't do it. So I didn't see anything allowed, 11, what was it?
No, no, no.
So that's a little minute 3 in the next draft. All right. Now we go to E, 2.2. The public utility,
Just real quick,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Dave, but this definition, you did not change any of this? The one that came from the state?
I will double check,
Okay,
but whatever I did with it, if, I didn't do it knowingly, let's put it that way.
okay, no, but I mean, basically, we're pretty sure that this is the boilerplate
Yes,
of the definition of the state. Okay.
Yes, and the idea is, as far as what this piece of paper does, other than tracking the state, that if you could mine here in this town before, whether it's below a certain threshold or above, you can now. And if you can't, if you couldn't, you can't. In other words, the idea is nothing in this document was intended, and will make double, triple certain that it will not have the effect of changing whatever was or was not allowed in the town before,
Okay, all right.
as to mine. And that's the instruction, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, we don't want to
Right.
mess with the businesses that are currently.
And that was our intention in drafting, so if there's any, that's the intention. If it doesn't, it's bad lawyer. Okay.
And you do mention gravel, by the way, in the body of little 1, Roman numeral 1. So it's there.
Oh, right, that's part of the
It's
states,
inclusive.
right,
It's
right.
inclusive.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think it's just
Right.
the equivalent of a typo, you have that
Right,
gravel.
no, that's fine, well, that's
Okay.
good, because we can point it out.
Next item is E. What we're doing here, there have been situations where we want to make clear that when we're talking, a public utility use and a public utility gets the benefit of certain, it's allowed in certain places. It's almost frankly sort of a favored use.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry. So it's in the existing code, it's on page 7, and in the proposed draft, or proposed amendments, page 4. So all we're doing here is, since this concept of a public utility use is essentially sort of like a most favored nation status, which it is in almost every zoning code, we want to make sure that the uses that get the benefit of that most favored nation status are the ones that we contemplate, true public utilities. So if it's really a monopoly, and the rates are set by the Public Service Commission or whatever, then that's a monopoly, and that makes them a public utility, and then they can do what they can do in these zones. What we don't want to happen is for a private company, and this has happened other places, for a private company, which is not a monopoly, to say that we're going to put a compressor station in, and we're allowed to put that compressor station in right here down the road, because because we're a public utility, and because they're not. So what we're doing here is making it clear that what everybody thought was a public utility is a public utility. So we're not trying to change but we don't want someone to be able to come into town a year from now, when we think that we know, and somebody said, we're putting a compressor station down there, and we can do it because we're a utility, or a public utility. utility the way that this is, because we are used for, we're a building structure, if lot, used for the transmission of. You know, it shouldn't be being able to do that, it should be who's doing that. So if it's truly a public utility, yeah, you get the benefit. But just because you're a private company in the business, you shouldn't be able to set down a compressor station. So that's why we did that.
So we're going from a building structure or lot used for or in connection with the transmission, distribution, or regulation of water, sewer, gas, electric, telephone, or other public utility service. That's basically what we have right
We're
now.
deleting that,
We're deleting that and we're putting in
this new language goes in.
an entity which operates as a monopoly and whose rates charged to customers are established by a utility commission. A public utility use is a facility which is operated by a public utility and which provides electric, gas, steam, telephone service, water, or sewage directly to the general public.
So if you're really a utility,
Right,
then you got no problem,
right, okay.
all right?
Everybody on this committee in agreement with that? Vince, yes, Trish, yes, Barbara, Barb?
Yes.
Okay.
The next thing, F as in Frank, is simply this public and semi-public use. I think was not used anywhere, and it has language in it about public utility installation that there's no reason to keep it in. So the better course, we thought, is just to delete it in its entirety.
Okay, and maybe ask though why take it out? There's no reason, I mean, what's the,
The problem, we'll have to change it then, because,
No, I'm just kidding.
well, because I didn't want to change it. Otherwise, we have to change it along the lines of what we did with the one before. Because right now, it's under the auspices, we all would agree that if it was a government use or a public utility use, as we've now defined it, that would be fine. But this is broader than that. It's a government or a public agency, or here, I just don't know what this means. Those involving public benefit or advantage. So once again, somebody's gonna come in and say, I wanna put a compressor station in, for example, and that's for the public benefit or public advantage. There's no tie to these uses being, if these were limited to government property, let's say, and so forth. But, or even, and day nurseries is a very, we're just talking about gas. Day nurseries is something you really want to think about before you simply say that they're out loud, because there's all kinds of different kinds of these kind of facilities. And depending on how many kids they have, and how many caregivers are there with the kids, and whether it's just a half day, the state regulates that fairly heavily. So virtually every other zoning code I've seen in this state, when they talk about that, they define that. Part of the definition is that you can never have just, okay, you can have, a certain kind of day nursery. It's always, provided that you've got all the right licenses from the state and so on. And the licenses change depending essentially how many kids you have in there at a time. If it's just your kid and somebody's there all day, you can have up to 2 other kids. If it's not just your kid, it's another license if it's 5 or 7, and then up to 15, and so forth. So this is a very broadly drafted definition when you really look it through.
So when it does this actual semicolon, and then does this whole list of all these things, but then it says and like uses, then that basically, that list is not comprehensive.
The whole thing is from a lawyer's standpoint. The semicolon is, what they meant to do was a colon in.
Okay.
They either put a colon in, or it doesn't make it. You
Because
put a
they
colon-
indicate these are specific of what they're
By-
saying.
Yeah,
are-
as examples, right.
Right,
The
exactly.
semicolon makes it mean nothing. So
Okay.
I'm sure that somebody just made a typo and put a colon instead of a semi. But my point is, given all of this, we really don't need this.
Mhm.
If there's a particular place where this gets picked up, and we want to use it because we have a church there or a governmental office, I'd rather say when we get to that district, government offices or houses of worship or whatever. Because this is real, somebody painted it with too broad of a brush here,
Right.
even if they drafted it right with the colon and the semicolon. So I thought the easiest way was to kill it.
Mhm.
It's not the only way to do it, but it's an easy way to do it.
I'm okay with that. On the committee, Barbara, Vince, Trish? All right, Marcia, how do you feel about that?
A little mixed. I guess I'm not really, you know, it's a definition only, right? And you're saying that it would be better looking into the different districts and what's allowed. And what, if we
Or-
needed a
or-
definition, go back and put a definition that would be
Or tighten
on
up the
point,
def- yeah,
or
either-
tighten this up.
Either tighten the definition,
Okay.
or when we go through there, so what we can do
Well,
is
I
move
guess,
on.
I guess the question is, within the zoning regs, how often do we encounter public use and public and semi-public use?
Well, I can say in my 10 years on the zoning board, we've never used this definition. That doesn't mean,
You
If
think,
ever.
my guess is you think you did. If you look, for example, at item 19, this just happened, it was literally just a page I happened to open to, page 15 of the existing code. And you look at item 19, at the very end. We see service buildings, storage yards, and so for public utilities, and public agencies. We never define public agency.
Right.
So my guess is when public agency comes up, people say, well, that's a government, you know what I mean? So basically, we either correct all these places where they occur, and either way, we've got to change this definition. We either have to, we can keep it and tighten it up, so what's in there is what we think is in there. And then when we go through again, we do, you know, when we see the word public agency, we'll change that so it says public use or whatever.
Well, what's it take to tighten it up? I mean, is that a doable thing?
Yeah, it's just, I just have to go through it and see each time. There isn't, I know there isn't, because of the town I'm in. I was going to ask if there was an electronic file.
Right, where you can actually search for it.
And then I could do a search.
Well, we can scan it in. and
No,
get to it.
it's a short code, I'll do it.
Yeah.
So let me go through and find out everywhere that I don't think we ever use the term, but everywhere we use what people thought they were doing with that term, so like the public agency, and I'll find that and we'll clean it up.
again, I don't think it's ever been utilized, but the point is, let's tighten it up. And
Yeah.
we may find out even after tightening it up, it's not necessary. But I would prefer that word.
Yeah. Right, and the other thing, that's really very good advice, because then it will be an allowed use that we have in the code, and if, as and when, even if it hasn't happened in 10 years, we need one 10 years from now, we won't have to do an amendment, it'll be in there if we, whatever it is, cemetery, whatever we put in, so that's a good way to do it.
So everybody's in agreement, we're gonna just have David tighten this up and come back so that it's relevant? Okay? All right.
The next item, G as in girl, and I think I talked about this last week. The change in service fraternal organization, again, was not my intention to make a substantive change. What I was trying to do is make sense of what otherwise, a definition that doesn't make sense. And the definition that's there not only doesn't make sense, but it would technically let anybody do anything they wanted to by, in those districts where this is allowed, simply by saying they were a service fraternal organization. Because all they are, you know, two or more people can say they're a group organized for a common purpose to pursue common goals. That can't be the definition that people intended for.
Service.
Right, and my guess is what they intended is something close to what I wrote.
Okay, so all of us who were at the special meeting heard David's explanation of this pretty extensively, so I don't think we have to go back through all of that. Trish, you remember that? Vince, I know you missed that part. Are you aware of this? Have you looked at the differences and the definitions of the service fraternal organization and what David's written down here and the concerns that he's expressed?
I just looked at both of them.
Okay, and you're comfortable with him, with the changes that he's made? Because all of us heard him he made a very convincing argument at the town meeting. So I'm fine with moving on with that and going with the definition that you put down. Okay, everybody agree with that? All right.
The next item, H, as in Henry, is a subtle, but I think important change to the definition of special permit use. And my change, the way that I read the existing definition, it looked like whoever drafted that sort of assumed that there were not circumstances under which an application for a special permit could be denied. Again, I don't think that was anybody's intention. So my change simply makes it clear that what the planning board review is to determine whether a special use permit should be granted or denied or conditionally granted. So it's a subtle difference in the actual language, but that was the intent behind it.
So currently, it's a use which, because of its unique characteristics, requires individual consideration, through a review procedure established by the planning board and may require certain conditions and safeguards before being permitted. And then the new one is a use which, because of its unique characteristics, requires individual consideration through a procedure of review by the planning board in order to determine whether a special use permit should be granted, conditionally granted, or denied. Yeah, that's
Yeah, I
much
think it
tighter.
tightens it up.
Yeah, that's much more
It
to
does not
the
take
point.
away anybody's right.
It's also consistent with the law, because almost the definition of a special permit use is a use which, if granted, and no assurance it will be, but if absolutely will require special conditions, that's why it's a special use permit. And this may require conditions makes it seem like you could have a situation where it's granted without special conditions. And that's what a special permit use is supposed to be.
Everybody's comfortable with this
Yes,
change?
yes.
Okay. All right.
Next item, let me see what I did.
Variance.
Well, all I is in Igloo is simply making it clear the definition of variance, that there are different